I am so pleased to be welcoming you to our Women in Dentistry Celebrating Impact webinar today. I am joined by Dr. Laura Tam, Dr. Susan Sutherland, Dr. Luann Visconti, and Dr. Lynn Tompkins, who you will be just seeing in a moment. But before I hand it over to our esteemed moderator and panelists, I do want to make sure I take some time to introduce the people whose stories you're going to be listening to today. So to start us off, I am so pleased to introduce Dr. Laura Tam. Dr. Tam currently serves as the interim dean at the Faculty of Dentistry and is also the first woman to be dean at the Faculty of Dentistry. She has served as the associate dean, undergraduate education, director of the comprehensive care program, and the course coordinator for the third-year comprehensive care program. And she's also the course coordinator for the third-year restorative dentistry courses at the faculty. Dr. Tam is also professor of restorative dentistry in the Department of Clinical Sciences and has conducted clinical and laboratory research on a variety of topics in dental materials and has been published in journals such as Operative Dentistry and the Journal of Aesthetic and Restorative Dentistry. Her research in restorative dentistry explores vital tooth bleaching and dental restorative materials. In 2015, Dr. Tam received the W.W. Wood Award for Excellence in Dental Education from the Association of Canadian Faculties of Dentistry for the University of Toronto. So that's Dr. Tam. I'm also excited to introduce Dr. Susan Sutherland. Dr. Sutherland is an associate professor at the University of Toronto, Canada, and until recently, dentist-in-chief at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Centre, with a practice focused on medically complex patients. She is the founding president of the Canadian Association of Hospital Dentists and the dentistry lead for Choosing Wisely Canada, and is actively focused and involved with committees of the RCDSO and the Ontario Dental Association. Her research interests focus on antimicrobial stewardship in dentistry and the use of virtual care to enhance care for medically complex dental patients. Dr. Luann Visconti was born and raised in Toronto and graduated from the University of Toronto's Faculty of Dentistry in 1988. After graduation, Dr. Visconti interned at Sunnybrook Hospital, which took her to Big Trout Lake First Nations Reserve to provide dental care. There she met her future husband, a commercial pilot and Timmins native. In addition to holding a practice of orthodontics in Timmins for the past 28 years, Dr. Visconti has always been involved in organized dentistry. She served as president of the Ontario Dental Association from 2017 to 2018, and she's currently the Ontario representative to the Canadian Dental Association Board. And finally, Dr. Lynn Tompkins. Dr. Tompkins is the current president of the Canadian Dental Association and has practiced general dentistry for nearly 40 years. And she has done so primarily in her own practice in Toronto. She has been involved in organized dentistry since she was a dental student, starting in 1979. Dr. Tompkins earned both her Bachelor of Science honors and Doctor of Dental Surgery honors from the University of Toronto. As the student governor of CDA's Council of Student Affairs, Dr. Tompkins was also the first woman to sit on CDA's Board of Governors in 1980. She is a clinical instructor in the Department of Oral Diagnosis and Oral Medicine at our faculty, where in 2006, she received the Dr. A. Bruce Holdmaster Teaching Award for Excellence in Clinical Teaching. She was also the first female president of the Ontario Dental Association from 2010 to 2011. How exciting. It is so great to be here, and I look forward to learning more about the history and experiences of these fantastic women, and I hope that you'll stay tuned into the conversation. The comments are open. We are on YouTube Live, so you're able to send in comments. We will prioritize the questions that were sent for the Q&A beforehand during registration, and then if we have additional time at the end, we'll be more than happy to answer further questions. So let's start off, Dr. Tam.
Success is subjective and means something different for everybody. How do you define and thereby achieve success?
So Laura, I'm going to start by saying what I think success is not for women. It's not having it all, or at least not all at the same time. I think over the course of our careers, we can have it all, but during the young baby years or whatever, our focus may be more on family, later it may be on career. So, the concept of work-life balance is similar. It is balance spread over our entire careers. And I think for me, looking back, success has been being satisfied with my achievements, knowing that I've always done my best or tried to do my best, and that I was kind to people. And that applies to work, family, whatever. So that's my definition, my personal definition of success.
Success to me, whether it is in my everyday practice or in a boardroom, it has been about making a difference. In clinical practice, I measure success by being a part of the patient's journey, that especially when it leads to their personal growth, which is to become more confident and more self-assured. Being in the specialty that I am in, which is orthodontics, you really see a change in someone's personality as you change their smile. And it's not about just using one's expertise to straighten their teeth, but it's also in being genuinely interested in and caring for them as a person and not just a patient. In organized dentistry, whether it was at the local component society level, the provincial level, or now the national level, it's really about working together with like-minded individuals toward the common goal of improving the dental profession, and not just for our members, but also for the patients that we serve in our communities. This takes on various forms, whether it's improving access to oral health care or providing the necessary tools for members to reach their full potential so that they can continue to provide high quality dental care to those that they serve. I really feel over the course of my professional life that these two aspects complete one another. The two halves make a whole and complement each other.
Great question, Laura, because you're right, it is different for everybody. And I would have to say that for me, success in dentistry means, and meant when I was still practicing, going home at the end of the day and knowing that you had done good things for people. So I would say that is the measure of success, that you know that you've done good for people, and then you can look forward to the next day as well.
I have another question. Dental tools and machinery were originally designed and built for men. Equipment manufacturers have begun to take these ergonomic differences into account, but progress has been slow. How have you adjusted to making these tools work for you?
It's a really interesting question because I actually don't think that I was aware that there was really any difference ergonomically in the way dental equipment should be made. So I do know that when we were in dental school, we had to perch on these very high stools because we worked in the old chairs that looked like barbershop chairs, actually. So those were very unergonomic for women if you wanted to wear a skirt. But I can't think of anything really in terms of the dental equipment that I would use because there's so many varieties of dental equipment around. The only thing I can think of is that when you started to see instruments that had thicker handles on them, they were easier on your hands to grasp. But that would be true for men and women. So it's an interesting question, but I don't really have an answer.
I think it's very interesting and one that a lot of us don't think about. When you're graduating, you just want to get out there and start your practice, start your family, start your life. But I moved to Timmins and I was the only orthodontic specialist here. So I did not have an associateship opportunity, which meant that I had to open my own office. And luckily, my husband did a lot of the construction. But it is an interesting question. There has been, there's been articles written about the male-female difference in ergonomics. And when contemplating this issue, it's not just about instruments, but also office design. And that's where I think I'm going to touch on in my answer, my response. A few inches in the dental office design can impose huge ergonomic challenges for women. Take, for example, your operator stool. I am, on a good day, 5'4". I have a long torso, a long body, and short legs. So I had a really hard time 30 years ago when I started to find stools that I could lower enough to, have my feet flat on the ground and have my thighs parallel to the floor. Nowadays, suppliers are utilizing ergonomic principles, and that allows them to take the average woman's seat height into account when designing their stools now, using shorter cylinders. The same is true of patient chairs and has to do with the amount of inclination of the patient's head needed for the average woman to work comfortably and ergonomically on a patient. If you tip a patient back too far, you get that panicked look in their eyes, and as they have a feeling of too much blood flow to the head. Who would have given work surface heights a second thought? Yet many offices are designed with working surfaces that are too high, and therefore we work with our elbows more elevated and not at our sides, as healthy ergonomics would dictate. Or shelf height of cabinets. Many top shelves of cabinets exceed the maximum height for the reach of an average size female. And if ergonomics is ignored, this is when you get work-related injuries such as musculoskeletal symptoms and conditions such as carpal tunnel. These factors are really relevant, especially for females working as associates in, or for those buying a practice where the principal was a male. Unless opening her own practice where it is built from the ground up, as I have the advantage of, the renovations could be cost prohibitive, particularly as a new or fairly new graduate with debt. So again, I was lucky that being in solo practice for 30 years, that I could design my own office and have my husband do the construction.
Well, I found that answer absolutely fascinating. This is something I have never thought about ever in my entire career. So I'm just thrilled to hear Luann's perspective on that. And I can see that all of it is really relevant. The only thing I can think about is I graduated in 1984 from U of T, and we used to have belt-driven handpieces. And there wouldn't a day go by, either in Lab 51 or in the clinic, that one of the women dental students didn't get long hair caught in those belt-driven handpieces. So that's my input to this question. But I'm just so interested to hear Luann's perspective.
At the Faculty of Dentistry, we're always trying to remind students to pay attention to ergonomics. And it's not something that students, when they're trying to get their credits, they're trying to get their first restorations done, it's not something students pay attention to, but it's something that they should for the rest of their lives in order to have a long career. The next question is, did you face any challenges finding role models and mentors when you were starting out? How have you contributed to becoming a mentor, not just other women dentists, but also for your patients?
That's an interesting question. When I graduated, I don't even think we were using the word mentor. Certainly we had role models, and I was very fortunate in my very first job, actually as an associate, that I was in a dental practice that was owned by a male and female partner. They were business partners, not romantic partners. And she became a role model for me because she was a very, very dynamic practitioner, very talented, but with a very good sense of business as well. And so I think I did learn a lot from her during the time that I was in her office. And in terms of how I have become a mentor to others, I think that's something, you don't set out to say, well, I'm going to be a mentor. You develop friendships with people of varying ages, and you meet people along the way and start to have conversations that naturally lead to more conversations about practice and certainly what's going on in practice. So I would say that the value of being a mentor is that you are also mentored by your mentee. You learn a lot in the process. So it's a very two-way relationship and very dynamic, I would say.
That's a great question, because my generation of women did not have mentors. In fact, there wasn't even a science of mentoring way back then. I did have some wonderful female role models, especially in medicine, working in the hospital. I had the opportunity to observe and work with some phenomenal leaders, most of whom were men at Sunnybrook. But women, in my time needed to be consciously aware that it was necessary to seek out advice, we called it, in terms of career success. And, the way mentoring went back then was it was almost the buddy system, like attracts like, and leaders were men. So men were able to have mentorship relationships, based on bonding and golf and all that kind of thing. So fortunately, things have changed a lot. And I think, I do informal mentoring with colleagues, and, that's always being available, giving advice when asked, a brain to pick kind of thing. But I did recognize, probably in the last 5 or 10 years of my career, the importance of formal mentorship relationships. And that means you agree with somebody to be their mentor, and it takes time and energy, and they agree to be a responsible mentee. You set goals and expectations. There's accountability on both sides. And that is so important, because if we just do the, informal type of mentoring, we do tend to exclude people who aren't like us. So I would tend to, mentor women, where some of the men, the male residents and male staff, needed to have a mentor. And certainly minority groups other than women were excluded from mentoring when there is this informal type of relationship. And so aside from kind of formal, informal mentoring, I think it's really important that women support women. And, I'm sure Luann will agree with this. And Laura too, like, how many times have you faced losing one of your most valued staff members because they're going back to school or they're getting a better job somewhere? And I think we absolutely have to support those people and say, good for you, go for it.
I totally agree. The one thing that I have to say I was always grateful for, I always had wonderful role models and mentors, 2 of which I have the honor of participating in this webinar today with. So I had the opportunity to work with and learn from Susan at Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center following my graduation from dental school in 1988. I met Dr. Lynn Tompkins through my involvement in the Ontario Dental Association, which has spanned almost 3 decades. And she was a very large influence on my becoming involved in organized dentistry at the governance level. And that led to my joining the board of the ODA in 2012, serving as its president in 2017 to 2018, and from there as Ontario representative to the CDA board. I see my role as a mentor and role model for others, not just a badge of honor, but my responsibility as a professional woman, and one that is more or less inherent with this position. I believe it's critical to develop leaders and to help others realize their potential, whether it is dental students, other women dentists, such as in my Timmins and District Dental Society, my patients. I do a lot of mentoring and with my patients, but also my family. I'd like to think that I'm a good role model for many of my nieces and great nieces and even my nephews. I want them to believe in themselves and to know that they can be anything that they want to be, and to not let anyone or anything stop them.
I really like how you pulled in people that we don't typically think of as mentors, because sometimes mentors have that quality of being somebody above you. So when you mentioned family, I think that's great. At the faculty, we do have different mentor relationships. For a clinical profession, a mentor is really important, I think. And we have encouraged now pairing. So 3rd year and 4th year students are paired with each other throughout the 3rd and 4th year clinical comprehensive care experience. And I think that's really important for 3rd years to learn from 4th years, and for 4th years to help to start a mentoring relationship where they are working alongside with a 3rd year student.
And if I could jump in, I will say that throughout COVID, I believe it was in April of 2021, I was invited to participate in a panel discussion on rural dental practice, and serving Indigenous populations. And through my participation in that, I had a dental student from Schulich, medicine and dentistry, and she reached out on behalf of herself and her colleagues, and they were very interested in mentorship opportunities up in Northern Ontario. Because of the time and because of COVID, I suggested that we set up a virtual mentorship. And so I had spoken to some of my colleagues here and really put together a list of mentors that had varied experiences. Some of them were in a corporate practice, some were internationally trained who challenged the NDEB exam. Some of them were young dentists just starting out buying their own practice. And so I put together a list, and they sent it to the dental students, and then they could reach out to whoever they wanted. And it's really worked well. I've really enjoyed it. And I think the mentors have got more out of it than probably the mentees.
A 2014 study concluded that male dentists in private practice earned 38% more than women in the same situation. Can you share your experience about some of the challenges you faced when trying to reach pay equity?
That's a good question. And so in terms of the study, when it says the same situation, I'm not sure if they mean working the same number of hours, accepting the same number of patients, doing the same number of procedures in an hour. So those would be things that I would probably want to see about the study. I know that I have had female colleagues tell me that they have more difficulty collecting fees from patients. I think sometimes patients assume that the woman is going to be more forgiving or they're going to charge less. And I do think sometimes women feel pressured to charge less for the same service. They may also be more willing to undertake patients who are on social services payments, and those do pay much less than the fee guide. But if men and women are working exactly the same hours and in the same practice setting with all the same administrative support, I don't see that men or women would make any difference in pay rates, because though the ability to do dentistry is not different between the two sexes.
With this question, when discussing salary differences, to me, salary implies that the dentist is working for someone and is not in private, solo, or a partnership practice. So to answer this question, I am going to assume that the female dentist is in an associate role. I will talk about a private setting, but salary differences could be related to part-time versus full-time practice, as we know that the weight of raising a family generally still falls to the matriarch of the family, and less hours means less income. In an associate setting, there may also be less money offered to females if the principal takes into account that the number of hours worked, and therefore the output to the bottom line of the office will be less. In a private practice setting where the female is the principal, there may also be differences in income levels versus that of a male principal of a practice. And I'm going to speak anecdotally here, but I feel that females may be more empathetic and therefore may be inclined to do more procedures on a reduced or pro bono basis. The other thing that I've run into is that people are more likely to not pay their bills with a female dentist versus a male dentist, and may be more inclined to take advantage of the empathy of a female dentist. And the only reason why I'm saying that, in my office, bill collection is referred to my husband, and he seems to get immediate results on payment of outstanding accounts right away after my front desk has failed to yield results. So again, I speak anecdotally, but I think there's that aspect to the income, especially for if you're running your own practice.
Yeah, I think Luann really hit on some major points. I think the research continues to bear this out. And even when all things are equal in terms of the number of hours worked, there is still a great pay gap. between men and women. And I think Luann pointed out a few of these kind of systems type issues. I think women are, and research has shown, are more likely to treat vulnerable or marginalized patients, such as those on ODSP or practice in a hospital setting. And yes, practice styles, I think, come into it where women may focus more on preventive procedures than the high-tech surgical procedures. And those preventive procedures are reimbursed at a lower rate. So I think if we acknowledge those two things, we have to fix the system that supports those kinds of things. We need to really fight for adequate government plans. We need to fight for our ODA fee schedule, suggested fee guide, to value preventive procedures. And, they are not valued at the same sort of level that some of the surgical and operative restorative procedures are. I agree with Luann about women entering into, ownership or associateship arrangements. And to me, that speaks to the fact that we really have to start teaching women to negotiate and to self-advocate. I'd like to also speak to gender-based discrimination having a major impact on the careers and ultimately, therefore, the income of dental researchers and educators. There's a lot of unconscious bias in academia, in grant reviews, if they're not blinded. That's been shown time and again with research. If there's a female name on the application, it's much more likely to get rejected. Same grant submitted with a male name gets accepted. Language in reference letters that says, she's great with people, she's kind and gentle, instead of saying she's a superb surgeon. Manels, this has had a lot of light put on it recently, where esteemed panels of experts are all men. And sometimes it's even when they're discussing issues like gender bias. So I think, there are many instances where there is unconscious bias that works against women making what they should be making.
I agree there's unconscious bias. I'd also like to say that money is not everything, particularly for women more than for men. So yes, women do make less money. It's been shown, I'm looking at a paper right now, there's less practice ownership by women. Women work fewer hours, they see fewer patients, they work for a fewer number of years over their lifespan than men do. So we do make less money, and it's important that we try to bring equity up. But at the same time, I think women maybe have a bit more of a balanced approach to life in general. Female dentists in Ontario are more concentrated in urban areas than in rural areas due to proximity to family. Can you tell us about your journey in choosing your type of practice and expertise, and some of the determining factors in choosing your current career path?
Well, I was not very creative, actually. It didn't occur to me to go outside of my local circle. I was born and raised in Toronto. I worked for a short period of time outside of Toronto in the city of Windsor because of a relationship, and moved to the city. And I had a great experience as an associate there. I moved back to Toronto and lived with my parents and worked in a practice just east of the city. I drove out there every day. But when it came time to buy my own practice, I certainly was looking in the city of Toronto. And I bought a practice, I got engaged and got married all in the same year. I got married to another dentist. He had a practice, and between the two of us, we had the two offices. And then we thought we'd be, very dynamic and go and see about acquiring a third practice, because we thought that was the right thing for us to do at the time. So over the years, we brought all the practices into one location, and we worked together in that practice. So I have to say I'm kind of boring. Nowadays, it seems that there's a lot more opportunity for people to go to different areas. So something that certainly I encourage students when I've encountered them in the clinic is to think outside the GTA, to think of areas where there is great need, where they're going to be busy, where they're going to be able to use all of their skills. and really enjoy the practice of dentistry. So I hope that more young people will consider that. I know it's more difficult for women, particularly if they have a spouse who is, in a job that requires them to be in an urban center. But I hope that as time goes by that will change, that the spouse will move for the female dentist, and they'll be able to go to an area where they can have a good family life and also a very good practice life as well.
Well, I came from a small town, and I always wanted to live in the big city. I was married before I started dental school, so of course, my husband was here. I wanted to stay here. Before I went into dentistry, I was a critical care nurse. So I knew from day one that a hospital was where I wanted to practice. I wanted that excitement, that vibrancy, being with people, being around, high performing colleagues and that sort of thing. What led me into leadership? I think that's in my nature. My family, my children will tell you that I'm bossy. I like to think that I'm, a leader. And I was very supported at Sunnybrook in developing as a leader. When I first was in the position of chief of dentistry, I was given the opportunity to take a program along with a number of medical colleague peers and senior leadership people that was put on by the Schulich School of Business in combination with Sunnybrook. And that was absolutely instrumental in developing me as a leader.
Well, funny enough, I was born and raised in Toronto to Italian immigrant parents, and I'm not sure that I had thoughts back then of moving to a smaller city. The opposite of what Susan wanted. Following my graduation from the Faculty of Dentistry at U of T in 1988, as previously mentioned, I had the great opportunity to do a one-year internship at Sunnybrook. Part of that internship was to provide much-needed dental services to communities living on First Nations reserves in Northern Ontario. While in Big Trout Lake, I met my future husband. He's a commercial pilot, and he was from Timmins. And just as a little aside, when he found out that I was from Toronto, he asked me if I had ever heard of Timmins and or knew where it was. So funny guy. But at the time, he said, I'm never moving back to Timmins. But when I completed my internship, I went off to Winnipeg to the University of Manitoba to study orthodontics in conjunction with a Master's of Science. And I graduated in 1992. By then I was married. And at that time, my husband and I decided to make Timmins our home, where I've been in solo practice for the past 30 years. Now, keep in mind, in 1992, there were no other orthodontists or dental specialists, for that matter, for 450 square miles. And the economy was on a slight downturn at the time, but it stayed relatively stable in Timmins, which is a mining city, gold mining, to be specific. My mother passed away, unfortunately, when I was 20 years of age. So would I have moved that far away from my family, and specifically her, had she still been alive at the time? It's a question that every now and again I ask myself. Now, don't get me wrong, I was really, really close to my father, who unfortunately passed away when I was 36, but is never quite the same as your mother. But I have to say, however, that I've been blessed with absolutely wonderful in-laws who at 85 and 89 years of age are still a force to be reckoned with. So that's how I ended up in Timmins, a rural, I guess rural by all accounts.
And I've always been in academia since graduation pretty well, so that tied me to either one of the big urban centers in Ontario.
And that is so true. You know, I'm just going to jump in here. To tell you the truth, when I was in dental school, I did not envision moving away from Toronto. And I always thought, or always hoped, that part of my professional career would involve academia somehow, either as a clinical instructor, working at, the Faculty of Dentistry, but living in Timmins, obviously, took a different path. You have solo practice, and then I became involved in organized dentistry, first at the local component society level, then at the provincial level with the ODA, and now at the national level with the CDA.
It's said that women in dentistry are recognized as having a different philosophy of clinical practice than men. Has your experience in this regard been true? Does being a woman entail a different approach for treating patients?
I would say that one's treatment philosophy is more related to, first of all, where you did your education. So every dental school has its own treatment philosophy, really. I mean, it's all based on science and evidence, but there still is going to be a philosophy of treatment that is taught within the school. So I think that's the first determinant. I think the next determinant for a dentist coming into practice is where they spend their first few years. So depending on who they're practicing with, if they have an associateship, they're going to be heavily influenced, I think, by the first dentist that they work with. So I'd like to say that we don't really differ, actually. I think it's more according to personality and to training and to early experiences and to whose practices we are exposed to.
Some say that female dentists exhibit different traits than their male counterparts, including we're more empathetic, we have better communication skills, we're perceived to be less in a rush in an appointment, we have better listening skills, and that we are more compassionate. And this is reported due to the fact that women are more nurturing by nature. We tend to focus more on relationships with patients. We tend to look at each patient more holistically. We will work towards meeting a patient's needs within the confines of their finances and within the limits of their insurance, and are known overall to be more gentle than our male counterparts. I'm not sure if the way that I care for my patients is due to my gender, but rather I would like to think that it is a summation of all the influences in my life, such as how I was raised by my parents and the values that they and others, such as my educators, along the way gave me. For myself, I feel that many of the traits listed above would accurately reflect my philosophy and how I practice. And that is what allows me to sleep peacefully every night.
I can't disagree with anything that Luann said. I think, both men and women, vary in their degree of empathy and caring and that kind of thing. But I do think overall, women are socialized differently from men. Hopefully that's changing as, we raise sons to be, more aware of gender differences and, with the change in the way people look at gender in general nowadays, I think is a really good thing. But, I think women who are practicing dentistry today were, for the most part, very socialized to be nurturing individuals. And really, I think this is very much reflected in the pay equity or inequity issues that we see.
What advice would you give to current students and the future generation of dentists?
So dental school was a long time ago for me. I think there were things that were experienced by female students back then, myself included, things related to career and family that were really quite shocking. But in terms of current and future dental students, I would say, follow your dreams, set high aspirations, don't let anybody have gender put you in your place kind of thing. When we're talking about, the student experience and, dental students and so on, I read a really interesting study recently where the researcher, when she was a resident in critical care, noticed that the male residents were getting to do a lot more high-tech procedures and were getting a lot better at them. And she asked around, and this was corroborated by her other female resident friends. So they did a formal study of 400 residents, and they found that there were two distinct groups: women residents who did a lot of procedures and those who didn't. And when they looked deeper through focus group analysis, they found that the programs where the women did a lot of procedures were very structured in terms of competencies, kind of like the old credit system. And where they didn't do a lot of procedures, they weren't structured like this. So in those unstructured environments, women really had less access to educational opportunities, and they had to self-advocate. And of course, women aren't really taught to self-advocate. So we need to really look at how training can influence practice and ultimately income. So I do think we need to teach women to be better self-advocates, better negotiators, and teach them the skills that they need to reach those aspirational goals.
Susan raises great points, and I certainly would agree with all of them. I have to say, from my own experience, I started dental school in 1984, and the class size was approximately 105 students, and approximately 20% were female. But I do have to say that throughout my time in dental school, I never felt any difference in the fact that I was female. Our class in general all got along very well, and we worked together really well, and we helped each other out. I was never made to feel inferior or that there were any barriers to what I could achieve. And that was like not from educators and not from my male classmates. Currently, we see the ratio of female to male students is on the rise as more females enter the profession. However, it's disheartening that we still have incidents like the one in Dalhousie a few years back to remind us that although the female presence in this once male-dominated profession is increasing, there are still challenges that our gender must face and endure. And it's not just gender. I think it's ethnicities as well. And much work still has to be done in order to gain equal footing in all professions. My advice to current and future dental students is similar to that of Susan's, in that, do not allow anyone to be disrespectful to you. Be proud of who you are. Never let anyone bully you or belittle you. And always, reach for your dreams. You can do anything that you want to do, and don't let anybody tell you any differently.
Excellent advice. Is there anything you want to share with the audience before we move to the Q&A?
I would just like to encourage everybody that is watching. You're in the early stages of your career, or you're still students. You are entering a very enjoyable, meaningful, and wonderful profession. Actually, it's at the edge of great change. It's a wonderful combination of medicine, of business, of engineering, of science, and of art, and a little bit of psychology too. So there's so many options open now to new graduates and young dentists that I would like to encourage you to explore all the options you have, and just see what's out there. There's lots of opportunity.
Absolutely. I love the dental profession, and I have enjoyed it, and I will continue to enjoy it.
I just want to take personal credit for all of Luann's success, not because I was her mentor or role model, but because I and the dental assistants and admin staff at Sunnybrook cheered her on through her being courted by her present husband. We rooted for him rather than the boyfriend who was sending flowers. And honestly, I think all of her success relates to that.
It's one of the best years of my professional life. And I'm not just saying that. It was like a family at Sunnybrook. We had a
ball, didn't we?
Learned so much, but it was so much fun, and everybody was great. And I'm not just saying that because she's here, but especially Susan.
Okay, I'll take it.
But
At
it
this
is
point in time, I'll take it.
I'd like to thank you for your insight and for sharing your personal experiences. And before I cut to Roshan for the Q&A, I'd also like to thank the audience so much for being here and listening to your stories.
Wow. I'm so amazed by the depth and richness of experience and history and character that all of you have brought to the conversation today. Thank you so much for that. Dr. Tam, thank you for moderating that panel, and to our panelists, Dr. Sutherland, Dr. Visconti, and Dr. Tompkins. Thank you for being so candid in your responses and for sharing that with us today. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to quickly go through the questions that we have from our registration. I don't think we'll be able to get to the questions in the comment section, but if you do have any questions, please send us an email with the questions we don't get to today, and we'll do our best to address those. So to start us off, the first question is from Dr. Kelsey O'Hagan Wong, and she asked, can you share some stories of challenging moments in your career and how you overcame them?
Well, I can think of one in particular that is that still rankles with me. When I went to purchase my practice the first time as a single woman, a dentist who'd been in practice for 5 years, I had experience, I had assets, but I had to go to the bank to get a loan to buy a practice, which was a growing concern. It was it wasn't a struggling practice or anything. But the bank wanted my father to co-sign the loan because that was 1985. And I guess it was considered that, women couldn't necessarily take on all that debt, or that they weren't reliable in terms of their relationship with the bank. So at the time, I didn't see that I had much choice, and it wasn't a problem for my father to co-sign the loan, but I still remember it. And so when it came time for us to take on a partner in our practice, in again came the bank, and this was just 2014, I think, and saying that they wanted to see all of her husband's financial records. And I said to the bank manager who I knew, I said, well, there's just no way that you should be asking her that. This is a woman who has assets, who has experience, and she's buying a practice that is a growing concern, and the practice can support, the debt that she's taking on. So they didn't get the results that they wanted, but she got the money.
That's a great question. I mean, how much time do we have in terms of challenging moments? I'm not going to talk about one specific instance. There have been many, but I think women in general, and certainly my generation, were taught to be polite, to not ask for what we deserve in terms of opportunity or adequate reimbursement. I think for myself, through observing other strong women who had achieved positions of leadership, and by doing a lot of reading about leadership, about self-awareness, and about self-advocacy, I came to realize that I do belong at the table, and I learned to be more assertive.
I think one of the most challenging moments in my career was when I was president of the Ontario Dental Association in 2017. This was at a time when the Me Too movement was just beginning. There were 3 major issues or challenges that presented themselves to the dental profession right when I took over as president. Public health units were shutting dental offices down for not following protocol with respect to infection prevention and control, and which led to a province-wide revamping of these protocols and the current practices. The Federal Minister of Finance put out a white paper regarding changing current tax planning using private corporations for small businesses. And we were also in a pre-election year and still had not seen any significant investment in provincial dental care programs in over 2 decades. In addition to all of this, I am a solo practitioner trying to maintain my practice while carrying out the role and addressing my responsibilities as the president of the Ontario Dental Association. I largely handled this by communicating with and preparing my patients ahead of time regarding my duties as president, working hard, and I mean day and night, having locums look after my practice, and staying the course. And what I mean by this is that you have to remove all of the background noise and focus on the issue, controlling what you can and realizing what you cannot control, and to never, this is the big one, take anything personally. because there was a lot of anger at the time among our members, but good communication goes a long way, as does keeping a level head in the face of chaos.
Much. That is so helpful, and I do agree. When you have challenging moments in life, it is so important to just continue, keep on moving forward. The only way you can do it, honestly. So thank you. The next question is from Dr. Farah Sardar, and she asks, is there, and this is in the context of women in dentistry and the career paths that they typically choose. And the question she asks is there a lack of opportunity for women to reach equal income levels and be represented in organized dentistry? Or are we now at a stage where less women choose to engage in leadership roles or their own practices or work longer hours? And again, the responses are going to be subjective. So I'm interested in learning a little bit more about your experiences with this.
Thank you for that question. It is really important to have women in leadership roles for other women to see that women can sit in leadership roles. It's very important then, in order to have that happen, is for downstream, for there to be enough women to then grow into these leadership roles. So I graduated in 1985, and there weren't that many female dentists. So in a way, understandably, there weren't that many female leaders at that time. I took an opportunity to see what we have within our own faculty, and we actually have, I did the numbers, we actually have fairly equal number of female and male faculty. And in terms of our leadership position at the faculty, we've got 40% of the leadership being female. I'm the first person to sit in the dean's chair as a female. I'm an interim dean, but it's been such a wonderful opportunity. And the other great thing that I first had a chance to see in September when we had our white coat ceremony is to sit down with the president of the RCDSO and president of the ODA, and we were all females.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I think we have seen big changes in the last maybe decade and a half. We had our first CDA president maybe 15 years ago with Debbie Stymiest, and then there wasn't one for a long time. And now we have Lynn, and we have a couple of other people on the CDA board, hopefully Luann, when her time comes, that will ascend to the presidency. So that's a major shift. The same with the Ontario Dental Association. I think the first female president was Liz McSween, maybe 15 years ago, and we've had quite a number since then, including both Lynn and Luann. As Laura pointed out, she is the first female dean at U of T. And if we look across Canada, there are a number of female deans now, but that didn't happen until 5 or 10 years ago. So I think we're coming, it's coming into stride, but we should be a lot further ahead than we are, because the pipeline sort of started to get fed, I think, in the 90s when, the proportion of females in dental school really increased. So we should be further ahead than we were. And I think than we are. And I think that we need to really be conscious of making sure that, females have equal opportunity for promotion in organizations and, in our faculties of dentistry. I know when I was chief of dentistry at Sunnybrook, and in my last, 5 years, I had to do a number of searches, and, for an oral surgeon and so on and so forth. And I was really, advised that by the search committee that gender equity had to be taken into strong consideration. And I do think we need these kinds of, incentives whereby, women and minorities get that added push, because it hasn't happened for so long. And I think if we're not conscious of it, it won't happen. I think also we all have to embrace that we do belong at the table. We are meant to be leaders, that we do deserve equal pay. And, I believe that's very important because pay is one way that society gauges your value. So I think, it's an important concept. And we have to be prepared. We have to know the facts. We have to go to the table having studied the issue and being, I often think the woman at the table has to be the most knowledgeable person at the table.
I can't disagree with anything that anyone has said so far. And as Susan pointed out, it's not just women who are underrepresented, but also dentists in early years of practice, those of diverse ethnic backgrounds. I recently sat on a search committee for the CEO of the CDA, and very large practice now is equity, diversity, and inclusion. But that said, the realities are the debt load of those graduating today is daunting. Mix that with starting a family, the cost of living and inflation, especially now as we're still feeling the economic impacts of COVID-19. Dental professionals in general, I think, are just trying to grow their practices, hone their skills, and stay above water financially. They're not necessarily always thinking about becoming involved in organized dentistry, as let's face it, a lot of them don't have a lot of hours to spare to volunteer. And if you do not live in the Greater Toronto area, you have to take time away from your family and practice to travel to meetings. This is just not feasible for many. So for many, as long as their daily practice is not disrupted, they do not give organized dentistry maybe as much thought beyond what they take away from it, which is fee guides and electronic claims transmission. I think that there are ample opportunities there to become involved. I know that there are for Ontario dentists to become involved in the Ontario Dental Association, for example, but it is, the ability to be able to do it that I think, sometimes is just not there.
Can I just add something to what Luann said? Because I think everything she said, I entirely agree with. And this is why I think it's so important to have built-in processes to be inclusive. We all learned how to use Zoom during the pandemic. And, as Luann said, to expect a woman who lives in, Northern Ontario or even London to travel to Toronto, if she's a new young dentist giving up, 2 to 3 days of her practice income for a one-day meeting, to have childcare concerns and all that sort of thing, I think we need to be really thinking about the processes and, allowing hybrid meetings all the time going forward. I think I think it's irresponsible not to do that, because we're excluding, we end up with the old people like me, who have the time and the, my kids are, grown up and so on, being the leaders, and that's not right. And when we are in person, we really have to make sure that accessibility for women in terms of breastfeeding and that sort of thing, that those exist.
That's a long question. So if I can break it up into parts. So are we going to reach income parity or equity with men? I think if women work as long hours as men do, then yes, they're going to reach parity. Are we reaching a stage where women don't want to have their own practices? That's quite possible. I mean, working 3 days a week as an associate is an attractive option for many women because it gives the work-life balance that they may be seeking. One concern I have about that is that while a woman is working as an associate, that's great, and it's certainly returning to her a good income as well as the opportunities to spend time with the family and other commitments. But she's not building equity. She's actually building equity in a business for somebody else, so that when you get to the end of your career and you're looking at retirement or selling your practice, the woman who's been an associate all her life will not have anything to show for that. So that is a concern for me. And I think I'd hope to see more women in their own practices or in partnerships with other women if they want to share. You can certainly have a very efficient practice arrangement where each woman works 3 days a week and you utilize the physical space of your office to the maximum. And that would, at the end of a career, deliver equity. And that is your pension, actually, because as a self-employed person, you don't have a pension. And the other reality is that the divorce rate cannot be ignored. So if a woman is relying on the partner to be the provider of all the benefits and pensions and so on and so forth, I know a lot of women who have been very disadvantaged by that, because when the marriage is broken up, they have walked away with very little. So it's something I would add as a cautionary tale. I think women should carefully consider the advantages of owning their own practices or being in a partnership with another woman, where they can build equity for their own security and future. And the other part of the question is about opportunities in organized dentistry. And I would say that those are wide open. I know at the Canadian Dental Association, we, at our last board meeting, have just passed a motion to incorporate as a key policy objective equity, diversity, and inclusivity in the organization and in representation. So I would say there are more opportunities than ever for women in organized dentistry, but you have to say yes if somebody asks you to become involved, and I would encourage you to do that, because that's a whole other aspect to your practice life and to your career. You make friendships, you build interests and an understanding of the bigger world that's going on around dental practice, and it gives you an opportunity to contribute as well. So I would say go for it.
Lovely. Thank you so much. And then the second last question that I have, I think we might have just time for one more after this. Dr. Laurie Houston has asked a question about sustainability, and I'm just going to paraphrase it, but it's more so: as women of influence in the fields of healthcare, are you going to advocate for change with our regulatory bodies in a practical manner that includes the suggestion of research initiatives at UFT for reusable protocols, such as reusable surgical wrap to replace single-use sterilization pouches for IPAC?
Great question. So environmental sustainability in dentistry is something, as CDA president, I have written about and committed to for the organization and for the profession. And again, at our recent board meeting, this was a motion that was passed to incorporate as a key policy area environmental sustainability for the organization as well as for the profession. So in terms of the organization, we're looking at carbon footprints of meetings, for instance, and transporting people across Canada to meetings. So the short answer is yes, and it's underway.
So first of all, shout out to Dr. Houston, who is also my 1985 classmate. I couldn't agree with you more that sustainability is a big issue in dentistry and in all of healthcare. We do go through a lot of PPE. And I think we have to question whether all of our infection control practices are evidence-based. Here at the faculty, we have a lot to do, more to do to make this better. We do have a sustainability committee, and that has just started a couple of years ago by a current graduating student. And hopefully we can keep it up and work on trying to improve our sustainability.
I think she's raised a really, really important point about sustainability of the environment, and not just dentistry, healthcare, the healthcare sector.
Yes. Yeah, we need to be stewards of the environment big time and leaders in that.
Okay, just one more question, and I think Dr. Tompkins, I'll address this to you. This is from Dr. Kathy Shank, and she says, what have you found is the best way of mentoring other young dentists, male or female? Do you think there is a place for gender and ethnic exclusive events and organizations? If so, please explain.
The best way to mentor somebody is to meet with them face to face, although I do know that the Zoom environment has created opportunities for people to meet and talk to each other. When it comes to exclusive events, I think we have to be careful that exclusive doesn't become exclusionary. So I think there can be events that have maybe are advertising to a particular audience to encourage people to come, but I think all of those events should be made open to everybody who wants to attend.
Thank you so much. That's all that we have time for today. We've gone a little bit over, but I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. And thank you for choosing to continue to participate in these conversations with us. And I hope